Okay, guys, here we are again with the second part of the second lesson. Okay, we were dealing and we are still now dealing with Gulliver's Travels. Okay, I will put my face and my desktop so you can see both of them. And we were saying that this masterpiece was written was published anonymously in 1726 after having been written for about 5 years from 1721 to 1725, as you can see here in this part of the screen. And we said that it consists of 4 books. It is a kind of mock travel novel, okay, dealing with travels. So, and the hero, the protagonist, the main character, and also the narrator of the novel is a ship surgeon. You can see it here, whose name is Lemuel Gulliver. And I was saying before the interruption that in order to make his novel, his account more realistic or more real-like, Swift provided illustrated maps of the places which Lemuel Gulliver visited. So he put in the first edition of his novel some illustrated map of these places, which are of course not real. You will see why, completely invented. They are product of his fancy, but he provided the readers with the illustrated maps. So in the first edition of the novel, if you open it, you will find these maps of the places which Gulliver visited in his travels. Okay, why? Because he wanted, as I have already said, he wanted to make these accounts as realistic as possible. Okay, um, we said that the novel is divided into 4 different books. Let's focus on the most important contents of the 4 books. In books 1, we have the first account of the first part of Lemuel Gulliver's life. We know that he is a surgeon, that he gets married to a quite rich lady, but his dream is to travel, is to see the world. In fact, for this reason, he decides to sail, and he sails from Bristol. Bristol is a city in the south of England. And after 6 months on the sea, he is shipwrecked. You already know this verb. To be shipwrecked means naufragare. Okay, we already know this word and this verb because we used it for Daniel Defoe's, okay, Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. So after 6 months spent on a ship sailing, Lemuel Gulliver's this ship surgeon is shipwrecked somewhere. We don't know exactly where, even though, as I have just told you, Swift provides some maps, okay, but somewhere in the South Pacific, nel sud del Pacifico meridionale, South Pacific. Then he wakes up and he understands that he is on an island, in a land, and he is cast upon the shore of this world, of this land that he calls Lilliput. Lilliput. The inhabitants of this land have a characteristic. They are the Lilliputians, and they are only 6 inches tall. 6 inches tall. I would like you to find online how many centimeters 6 inches are. So you will tell me next time, okay? So please try to understand how many centimeters 6 inches are. So how many centimeters these Lilliputians, namely the inhabitants of this land in the South Pacific, Lilliput, are. So in the book 1, so there is the account of the first part of Lemuel's Gulliver's life and of his travel in the land of the Lilliputians. Then we will say something more about the protagonists, about the people that he met there, about the type of satire that is mainly political and social that he does using this word, okay, that is a product of his fancy, of his imagination. Then in the book number 2, in the second book, Lemuel Gulliver sails for India, but this time he doesn't find himself in India, but in another strange world, in another strange land, whose name, as you can see here, is very difficult to be pronounced, is Brobdingnag. Brobdingnag. Okay, in Brobdingnag, what is the characteristic of the inhabitants of Brobdingnag? They are really big, they are huge. It is the land of the giants, while the land of the Lilliputians was the land inhabited by tiny, small, very small creatures. Now, the land of Brobdingnag here, where he finds himself and which is located as following what he says near Alaska, the inhabitants are giants, the natives are giants, and as he says, as he tells, as he writes, they are 12 times as tall as him, 12 times as tall as him. Quindi sono più grandi di lui di 12 volte, sono 12 volte più grandi di lui, 12 times as tall as him, as Gulliver. What happens in the land of Brobdingnag? He is kept as doll, as the doll of the king's daughter. Okay, he is kept as a kind of doll, and also there he mocks or he makes a bitter kind of satire of social and political satire. Then, going in depth, we will see how and with what characters Swift tries or succeeds in mocking England and the international and national politics of England. Then he manages to go away, to leave the land of Brobdingnag, and he is rescued by a ship, and he manages to go back to England, to return to England. Then in book 3 there is the account of Lemuel's Gulliver travel to a lot of strange islands. The most important and maybe the one which is really which strikes our imagination, and also the one in which the satire is really clear, is the flying island of Laputa. We will read something about the 5th chapter of this book, of book 3, that you will find both of your book and in my notes in Didattica, and we will see that the inhabitants of this flying island, quindi un'isola volante, this flying island of Laputa, are mostly immortal and absent-minded astronomers. Absent-minded. What does it mean? They are immortal, so they never die. Okay? And they are absent-minded. Absent-minded, con la mente assente, we can say. So they have their heads in the clouds. Okay, like the island, or as the island is a flying one, so it is surrounded in the sky by clouds, so are the heads of the astronomers, philosophers, and scientists who are its inhabitants, who live there. So he finds himself on a flying island, and all the inhabitants of this island, who are scientists, okay, philosophers, and astronomers, have their heads in the clouds. Why? Because they spend all of their lives making absurd experiments. They do the strangest possible things. We will see, we will read together how many strange experiments, absurd experiments they make in these labs, scientific labs on the flying island of Laputa. Then he manages again to leave Laputa, and he goes to Japan, and from Japan he succeeds in returning, in going back to England. Then we have the last travel and the last book, namely the book number 4. He goes, or he finds himself again in a very strange island, which is the island of the Hoyums. Hoyums. Okay, also here the sound is very difficult, but you can call it the Hoyums, and it is the island inhabited by um, horses, by clever, intelligent horses, which are endowed with reason, which are endowed means sono dotati di. They have got reason. They have reason. They speak like humans. They have some behaviors, comportamenti which are human like. They have got reason, okay, but they are horses. Their shape, okay, their appearance is the appearance of horses, cavalli, okay. So they speak like human, they have got some human behaviors, they have got reason, which is usually considered a human attribute, but they look like horses. And these horses, the Hoyums, rule over a species of animals which look very much like human beings, which are called the Yahoos. The Yahoos. So they rule over them. So the masters, the lords, are the horses, and the creatures, this species which is ruled over by the horses, are like human beings. Okay, so on one side we find these very clever horses, and on the other side the creatures which they rule over, okay, and they are humans. The horses banish him because he is considered inferior to them, and he leaves for England. He goes back to England, and he joins his wife again and his children, but he goes to live in the stable, in their stable, because he prefers the, the presence of horses than the smell of humanity that he can smell in his house. Okay, and here we will see what is the satire, even though it looks or it sounds obvious. Okay, Before going in details, because going deep into the contents of the four books, I would like to tell you something, as you can see here, okay, in this slide, to tell you something about the sources of the novel Gulliver's Travels. The sources. The sources in this case means the fonti, le fonti. So where or what kind of literature, what are the examples, what are the books, what are the genres which Swift used in order to write Gulliver's Travels. The first, maybe the most obvious of them all, is the literature of travel, which was really very popular during that period. We have an example of literature of travel, as I have already said, in Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, and we know that these accounts of travels were very popular at Swift's times, and so he uses much of this genre of the travel literature as a source of his novel. Then the work or the works of the Royal Society. The Royal Society was the very first scientific club society in England, royal, because it was patronized by the king. Okay, and the works, the scientific works of this society, of the Royal Society of Sciences, were used by Swift in order to write his Gulliver's Travels. Then another source, which is very clear, okay, is the genre dealing with the political allegory. Okay, so the allegory of political characters, political people, and political events. Then he also used something that was used by most of all French writers during the 17th century. So the technique of using an imaginary voyage as a vehicle to express their theories. Okay, we find, for example, in this period, most of all in French writers, writers who deal with what in Italian we call utopie or utopias. What are they? They are places which are imaginary where man lived an uncorrupted life, a life which was completely different from the life in Europe, most of all, and on the earth. Okay? Now, I would like to tell you something about the character of Gulliver. Character. Character doesn't mean personality, okay, but is personaggio, okay? Who is Lemuel Gulliver? How is he described? Or better, how does he describe himself? Why do I say how does he describe himself? Because as I told you, Swift uses a first person narrative, which was very common in the novels of this period. Don't forget the characteristics of the first novels, of the novels that we consider the first in English literature. We have said that we usually find in this novel a middle class man, self-made and self-reliant, which looks very much like the middle class reader. Okay, don't forget what we said in the past when we started to study the rise of the novel in England and in Britain. So let's focus on Gulliver, who is the protagonist, the hero of this novel. When he writes his accounts, he is a middle-aged Englishman, middle-aged, di mezza età, is well educated, so he went to school, he studied, he is sensible, and mostly he is a careful observer. Careful observer, un attento osservatore, careful observer, as you can see here. Why the fact of being a careful observer is fundamental? Because he describes very often in details what he sees around him. And the fact of or is a skill, okay, his ability to observe everything carefully is reflected in the details that he uses to tell about his experiences. Okay, another characteristic of the protagonist of Gulliver's Travels is his wide experience of the world. So he puts together two things: his education, so the fact that he knows much because he has studied much, but he puts together with it, okay, he mixes his education, so his knowledge, with his experience. Traveling, he is experiencing the world. So he has got both of the things. He has got a good education, but he has got also a big experience of the world. So he is a kind of prototype of the self-made and self-reliant middle-class man. But in these characteristics, okay, he is really very much like the other protagonists, the other typical travelers of the period, the other protagonists of the travel literature of the period. But there is also a difference. There is also a difference between Lemuel Gulliver and the other typical travelers of the period. What is this difference that you can see here? The difference is that mostly the people he meets during his voyages are not children of nature. What do I mean when I say that the people he meets during his voyages are not children of nature? For example, think of the only novel that we have read and we have dealt with, Robinson Crusoe. Do you remember when Robinson Crusoe meets Friday? Friday is considered a child, of nature. He's considered a child of nature because Robinson Crusoe, we said, as a colonist, wants to put his fingerprint on it. Is considered like a child who has no religion, who has no culture, on which the culture, the lifestyle, the religion can be put, okay, as a footprint on the sand. Here there is a big difference because all the people, all the characters, so all the tiny Lilliputians, all the giants, okay, in Brobdingnac, all the scientists, philosophers, and that he meets in Laputa, for example, all the characters, all the different inhabitants of the lands which are visited by Gulliver are not children of nature. They've got their peculiarities, their characteristics. They are described as very well characterized. They have their characteristics, they have their mindset, they've got their culture, they've got their religion. Exactly describes them for what they are. Okay? And this is a very fundamental difference between the typical travel literature and this satire, okay, written by Swift. Then there is another difference, that is the fact that Lemuel Gulliver is deeply disgusted by everything that he left at home in Europe, in England. Okay, he always compares the situation that he finds in the other places, in the places where he travels to, with the situation in England, in Europe, in Ireland. And comparing them, we can understand how deeply he is disgusted by all the situation that he left at home. In fact, Lemuel Gulliver in this shares the same opinion, the same idea with the author, so with Swift. He thinks that Europe is really falling into a state of corruption. Okay, then let's focus on the style which Swift uses in this novel. As I have just said, he uses a first person narration. So it is this fictional character, this fictional ship's surgeon, Lemuel Gulliver, who tells about his own life, his own experience, his own travels. Think about the title, Gulliver's Travels, I viaggi di Gulliver. So he tells, using the first person narration, his own experiences. Then the prose style is what is called, sorry for the noise, a matter of fact. A matter of fact prose style. What is the Italian for matter of fact? If we use, for example, I will show you, as I always tell you to do, word reference, and we write here from English to Italian, matter of fact, you can see it here, you will see that the Italian is matter of fact, concreto, pratico, okay? Matter of fact, so he uses, okay, a style, sorry, what have I done? A style which is matter of fact. Matter of fact, so pratico, concreto, okay? His prose style is very matter of fact. It sounds or it looks very much like the same style, prose style, that we have found together in Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Then sometimes his style is free of literary coloring. What does it mean? He feels free of giving a certain shade of literary coloring. Ci sono alcune coloriture di tipo letterario, ok? Then he tells in details with precision, with the precision of a scientific instrument, what he observed during his travels. So he uses this kind of very precise, detailed language to record the details of his travels. Then I would like to tell you the last important thing about Gulliver's Travels, that are the possible levels of interpretation. It is considered a tale for children, okay? In fact, his adventures are usually told as a fairy tales to children, okay? Because his adventures are absurd, are amusing, so try to think of this giant, okay, in the land of the Lilliputians, of this tiny man in the land of the giant. But it is not only it has not only been considered a tale for children, but also a political allegory of Swift time. Un'allegoria di tipo politico. Why? Because mostly in the first book, in the second, and in the last, in the fourth book, he makes some very clear references to the political, social, economical situation of Europe at this time. Then it is obviously a parody of the voyage literature, of the travel literature. Why? Una parodia della letteratura di viaggio, ok? Because it mocks it, its characteristics, the fact, the possibility of man to see very absurd and strange things. It mocks this type of literature, as I have just said. And then it is obviously a masterpiece of misanthropy. We said what misanthropy is, we said it at school, we repeat it briefly today, but we know what misanthropy is. And if you think of his hatred for man or for some characteristics of the human beings, we can understand that this novel is a kind of reflection on the aberrations of the human reason, of human reason. Okay? He reflects, he thinks about the condition of human beings and how the human reason has and how human reason can change, okay, can change the way we see the world, how human reason alone, as we said, is not enough, but it has to be linked, okay, with common sense. It is an instrument that must be used properly. That is all. This is the general part, and dealing with this general part, you will find the questions, okay, in your didactica. Then in the third part of this lesson about Gulliver's travels, I will give you some more details about the people, the inhabitants of the four lands that he visits, and about the political, social satire and allegory. See you soon, guys. That's all for now, and I close everything. Bye bye.